Now, Reform UK plans to introduce a windfall tax on wind and solar farms if it wins the next election. They say the move would raise £10 billion a year. You could buy a lot with 10 billion quid, right? The party argues net zero policies were to blame for higher energy bills and deindustrialisation in the UK. In a moment, Ed Gemmell, leader of the Climate Party, is with us. First, Harry Wilkinson, head of policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Afternoon to you, Harry. Give us your overview on this. I mean, it's well known, it's hardly a secret that Reform don't go big on the net zero thing. In fact, there's quite a lot of people don't go big on the net zero thing, but they're taking this one step further. They're not just saying we wouldn't enact these policies. We're saying if you've got a wind farm, there's a big old tax coming your way.
That's right. It was quite disappointing for me to listen to the announcements yesterday. I am someone who is, deeply frustrated about how net zero is going, how our energy prices are rising, and so I think we do need a big change from what's happened before. However, Reform's policies that they've announced will simply increase bills. They've said they want to put pylons underground. Now, putting pylons underground makes them 4.5 to 5.7 times more expensive. According to one report, the national grids say it's 10 to 20 times more expensive. That is something that will increase bills. And when we look at this windfall tax idea, it's very important to business confidence that when they enter into contracts with the government, as they've done so for renewable energy subsidies, those are delivered. I think those subsidies should never have been granted in the first place. But a chaotic sort of attempt to force renewables off the grid with a tax, could end in a very difficult and messy way. Dieter Helm, for example, in his cost of energy review, says we should create a bad bank. So actually take these off of consumer bills, make sure that the government meets its contractual obligations, and then pursue energy market reform. The problem is that none of these things will actually get bills down. You look at a ban on battery storage as well. We do have a very volatile grid at the moment because of all those renewables, that wind and solar at the moment. So the batteries, albeit in a very modest way, do help manage that. And along with the decision to put the cables underground, this is a package which will increase bills, not reduce them. Ultimately, the problem we have here is there is no market to determine what the cheapest way of getting reliable power is. So any large-scale technology that you build today will need government support and government subsidy. This is not a sustainable situation. We need actual competition to find out the answers to this question, and allow, for example, renewables with batteries to compete against nuclear, to compete against gas. We just have no way of finding out the cheapest method of generation at the moment. And so people just end up paying more and more for their bills.
And when Reform say, look, this will actually lower energy bills, which is their contention, and it will be good because this whole industry is taking up jobs, it's costing, the move they say would raise 10 billion a year. You can see why some people would be enamoured by that, even if you're not, Harry.
I completely sympathise with the intention here. Renewables have been, and particularly now when we're adding new renewables onto the grid, you're building in locations where that power actually can't get to market, because maybe you have all these wind turbines in the Highlands of Scotland, that power can't get down to London. So knowingly, we are financing wind turbines that are going to be switched off most of the time, that we know that we're going to have to pay to switch off most of the time. This is incredibly inefficient. This is a disaster. And so, of course, I sympathise with that desire to actually claw some of that money back. I think, we have to find the right way to do this. So I do sympathise with that intention.
Well, I think Mr Farage and Reform would say, well, we'll just ultimately get rid of the wind thing and the solar thing, and we'll just get drilling again. Bit of fracking going on. sorts the whole thing out.
Going forwards, I wouldn't be subsidizing renewables. What we're talking about here and what reforms policy was about was looking at, what's currently in place. I would want to have competitive auctions for firm power in the way that Dieter Helm described in his cost of energy review. I think the government needs to sit down and think about how it reforms the energy market. However, going forwards, only the technologies that can compete in the market should be built, and that's how I would get down bills.
And you don't buy into the 10 billion a year that would be raised?
Well, how much of that 10 billion is going to end up going down the drain to put all these pylons and cables underground? That could cost billions of pounds in itself. So they're taking with one hand and then sort of giving it back on unnecessary projects with the other. And batteries are a long way off. Batteries, even plus renewables at the moment, I don't think are anywhere near competitive with combined cycle gas turbines, for example. However, we have to allow innovation. Innovation is a beautiful thing, and just simply banning batteries doesn't allow for that. So I really don't see why they've also proposed to ban batteries altogether. Of course, there are safety concerns. They need to be managed appropriately. We need fire safety properly done in this instance, but just banning batteries altogether, I can't see why they would have proposed that solution.
Harry, thank you for your time. Harry Wilkinson, Head of Policy at the Global Warming Policy Foundation. Ed Gemmell is with us, leader of the Climate Party. You might curiously have more in common than you thought with our previous guest, Ed. I mean, certainly he doesn't seem to support reforms plans, doesn't think it will come to much, and certainly won't raise 10 billion quid a year. But they are right. There's a lot of wastage going on in this net zero experiment, and one of the problems is that it is an experiment, right?
Well, I think your first comment is yes. I think Harry and I might be quite surprised that we actually come down on the same side on a lot of this. And I think just picking up one of the things he's saying there, where we should have competitive energy markets and let those energy markets, supply into the grid and based on which are more competitive, is the right way to be doing it. And, our prices have been artificially high because of the cost of gas. So look, if gas stays high, forget the carbon emissions on it, it should be renewables that we're using to produce the energy.
Or nuclear. Nuclear would do it nicely, wouldn't it? That solves everything.
Nuclear isn't actually that cheap. But yes, but the principle stays the same within that, is if it's on the cost of energy, then they should be competing. Now, I think there is one thing as well, which is completely missed out of that. You do need to invest in innovation. That's not what Reform are talking about. They're talking about, actually getting rid or make it very difficult for an industry that's actually working very well for us at the moment, both our solar and our wind. But we've got to invest in innovation as well. Batteries have been mentioned. And look, I'm not the greatest scientist, but I know there's companies in Oxford and Cambridge working on wood batteries, solid state batteries, and all sorts of things that will make it much more efficient. And we need to be encouraging them and getting those innovations move forward so that we can make them work and export. We've got tidal power, which at the moment is more expensive than the others, but we've got a massive amount of tidal power around our shores, which is totally predictable, totally British, using our natural resource. And we need to get into that and lead that as an industry and not think that net zero is actually a problem for us.
Do you one of the problems, I think, on the doorstep, if you like, on this, Ed, and it's not unreasonable, is a lot of this technology. Look, if I thought that solar and wind was going to provide me cheaper and an endless supply of energy, and it's better for the environment, I think nearly everybody would agree with that. What's not to like in that? Ultimately, once you've got the infrastructure in place, your energy is technically free. It's just coming from the elements. The problem with that is that there is a lot of suspicion, even from very qualified, heady people with big, impressive titles, that this is still very much experimental. Bits of it might work some of the time, but we're ploughing an awful lot of money into something where the jury is still very much out.
Well, when we say we're ploughing a lot of money in a sense, there's less and less government money in it. The Contracts for Difference scheme, on the base of the way the prices are pegged, government effectively guarantees a price, but then if it goes over that price, government makes money. So they're not actually spending as much as you might think on that. If you come to something that's completely new or very, very infantile still like Tide, then investment would need to go in. But I think it's bigger than that. And one thing that worried me very, very much by what Reform said, and which is total and utter misinformation, I mean, completely wrong, is this idea that net zero has caused deindustrialisation in the UK. I mean, apart from the fact that net zero is only a concept that came out in the Climate Change Act back in 2008, and then really as a concept was only brought in 2019 when we talk about really 100% net zero. And we've been seeing a decline in our manufacturing and industry as a percentage of our GDP now for decades, for a century. In the 1970s, a third of our GDP came from manufacturing and industry, and now it's around 8%. And since we started doing net zero, it's only dropped from around 9% to around 8%. So it's not, the problem is not net zero. The problem is us, and us allowing so many things to be manufactured abroad. And we have to now create a real industrial strategy, something which Reform have no idea how to do, and something which the Labour Party and the Conservatives have no idea how to do. We have to get a big mission, a big industrial opportunity that is worldwide.
What are we gonna make though, Ed? I mean, what's the plan in Ed Gemmell's world? You're leader of the Climate Party. Let's say you get the big job in number 10. What are you going to start making and producing that no one else has ever thought of before?
I think it's a direction. I think what government needs to do is to set the mission, the vision, the direction. And here we have a massive direction. The whole world's going there. You know, net zero and artificial intelligence, but I mean, I'm talking about net zero here. Net zero is a direction that everybody's going in. 90% of the world economy has now set net zero targets. There is legislation going in all over the world in countries to go there.
Does that make it right, though? Does that mean they're all right? Or is it the great global habit of groupthink, Ed, where somebody has an idea, they all go to meet in Davos or wherever, they have a big powwow and everyone goes, here's a good idea, net zero, because that makes us really nice people, doesn't it? Because we don't want to kill things with bad pollutants. And everybody jumps on this. They think, well, there might be a few quid in new industries, but Richard Tice called it scrap net stupid zero. They want to scrap it altogether over there at Reform because there's many people just simply cannot see or cannot get on board with the evangelical nature of it. It's not a case of saying if the wind turbine works, you know, fine, we all get that, but it's the nature of it taking over a lot of areas of life, the workplace, behaviour, straws, the kind of things you can and cannot drive. There's a big old list of stuff here that sounds like it's more of an ache than it is a solution.
I completely look at it a different way, Ian. Let's imagine it's you and I sitting here as board of directors, and we're in a PLC, and we've got a clean sheet, so we can do what we like. What are we going to think about doing in the future? Number one, we're going to look at where government policy is going. So whether that's in our country or in the world, where's it all going? Okay, that's one thing. We're going to look at what's being innovated on at the moment. And those innovations are signaling what people are wanting and needing. So where's all that innovation going? There's a lot of innovation in the net zero space as one of the big spaces at the moment. And then if we sat back and go, okay, so that looks like a business opportunity because policy's going there and the investment is already going there. Now let's look at that scientific bit. Maybe those scientists are wrong, but if they're not, 1.7 degrees of warming in January, 1.6 degrees of warming last year, you know, a report come out from one of the top scientists in the world saying all of the previous predictions were conservative. And then as us as businessmen, we're going, okay, our direction, let's just make a bit of a bet. Let's go where the policy is. Let's go where the investment's already been going. And let's follow that science because it's pretty likely if that science ramps up, that there's going to be more and more investment in that area.
Yeah, there used to be a lot of investment in Betamax video recorders as well, didn't there?
Well, sure, but they're a cycle. That doesn't mean that video's gone out. Look at us here. We're only to some extent in the innovation coming out of Betamax videos. You know, everything goes through and moves forward. It's why when we're talking about our solar panels and our wind turbines, imagine if we drove innovation in those 50 times quicker, what they look like in 10 or 20 years. You know, we've got to be driving those innovation cycles, Britain at the front of it, leading it, and not allowing what has been America and China making the money out of it.
OK, so we've got to make stuff then. We've got to make the windmills, we've got to make the solar panels, not just import it from China.
Absolutely not. No, we bring forward our net zero target here, do it here, create it here. We've got the innovation. It's happening. Cambridge, Oxford and many other places. You know, I've been in some brilliant companies in Oxford recently, one called Levidian, doing amazing stuff. from methane gas. It's pulling it out the air and it's making it straight into graphene and into hydrogen, going straight into industrial processes. Absolutely fantastic. Those kind of companies are already in Britain. What we need to be doing is having more of them, investing harder and driving them into the creative industries that can then be exporting to everybody else.
OK, on that point, Ed, thank you. Ed Gemmell, leader of the Climate Party.